Hyper Light Breaker is a new early access game set in the same universe as developer Heart Machine's cult classic Hyper Light Drifter. It's no secret that the newest installment, Hyper Light Breaker, has come out to some mixed reviews. But let's take a look past some of the Steam reviews and see what state this early access game is in. It's the Dove here to give you an Indie Spotlight Early Edition on Hyper Light Breaker. This is a new addition to the Deep Dive family, as I want to take a look at some early access games to let fellow gamers know if the games are worth their money and time. If you haven't tried them, some early access games are almost rough drafts of their final product. But gaming enthusiasts like myself take chances on some of these games because you can save money buying the game in early access, your feedback has more impact on the outcome of the game, and sometimes it's just fun to watch how the title evolves. It's a definite coin flip to whether the game will be good or not, but that is pretty much the way of all games. So let me guide you on a few early access games this year, and let's get started with Hyper Light Breaker. So is the game worth it, and should you jump into early access now? Short answer is yes. I think this game is both worth the opening price, and although you may want to wait for some bugs to be worked out or for the full feature list and roster to get here, you also get a free copy of Hyper Light Drifter as an opening release deal. I would recommend Hyper Light Drifter to retro game lovers or anyone looking for an indie action RPG with some fun gameplay and an amazing setting. But what about Hyper Light Breaker? To start off, Heart Machine said right out of the gate that you will want to play this game as a co-op before even trying to go solo, and they are 100% right. Until you have a good handle on where to go and what to do, most gamers will find the game extremely frustrating if they're trying to go solo. Hyper Light Breaker periodically spawns groups of enemies, mini-boss style enemies, and meteors that essentially shrink the map down. And that's just the main map. Boss battles get very hectic. The most glaring thing you will notice right off the bat is the lack of direction. But the developers mentioned in their first update after launch they are aware of the lack of an onboarding process. The lack of direction is probably the biggest hurdle to overcome in this one, but I'll try and help a little. To sum up as best I can, you'll be put on a map filled with enemies, weapons upgrades, abilities, mini-bosses, and 3 main bosses, or in this game they're called crowns. There are a few more icons on your map, but this is the main focus. Your goal is to first collect between 2 to 6 prisms that allow your team to take on those 3 crowns. After defeating them, you can take on the Abyss King, which is the main objective. You and your team have 4 lives, or reses, before the whole map resets and you restart your run. When playing with teammates, you can respawn fallen characters if the living character has an extra medkit or if they can afford and get to a shrine to revive you. You and your team can also extract yourselves at nearly any time during a run by going to the extraction point and surviving a few waves of enemies for a little under a minute. That's pretty much it. Not as quick as I'd like, but there are a lot of components going on in this one. I also want to note that at this point in early access, the final boss, the Abyss King, is not available. It still takes a lot of skill and strategy to be able to take down all 3 bosses in a run, but if you want that final boss fight, and maybe wait for a few updates. Whether you jump into an online run or try to go solo, remember these few things. Your dash and hoverboard are your best friends, and heals are hard to come by. You'll eventually get to upgrade to 2 heals down the line, but early on, remember health and heals come at a premium. The combos and attacks open up a lot once you can upgrade your loadout, but you'll have to dive in for a few runs first. When starting out, you will only have a basic melee weapon and a gun, or rail in breaker lingo. To effect more damage, gamers will have to find upgrades, and most of those upgrades and weapons are surrounded by groups of bad guys. Gamers will likely have to find armor and some kind of special attack, whether that be a grenade throw, special high damage punch, or some temporary armor. You'll want to have the basics before taking on those crowns. And I think this is the disconnect with some early players. Before actually figuring out their surroundings and getting the gear necessary, gamers, myself included, just run straight for the crowns because they see it on their map and think that's the overall objective. Now, I don't often litter my reviews with advice, but I need to stress that players need to level up their gear first. Maybe even take a few runs to get that setup that feels right to their playstyle. Players' gear will also suffer the consequences of their death. I know some gamers hate hearing breakable gear, but if your character dies on a run, who would get their gear to bring back to them for their next run? Instead of outright losing that, Hyperlight Breaker gives rare items a few chances. You can see the bars at the bottom of each item that indicates the uses that are allowed. If you extract with an item, you don't lose a turn, but if you and your teammate go down, you lose that use. At this point in early access, the most I've seen on any one item were 3 bars. As you fight through the map, the difficulty of the enemies and the amount of waves increases. You'll see the indicator right below the map, so you won't be able to stand around too long before the map is swarmed with meteors and waves of nasties looking to take you down before you can defeat the Abyss King. Enemies that took only a few hits take a lot longer when the meter fills, and the overall amount of them adds up quickly. So, overall, the gameplay. The combat seems simple at first, but as I mentioned, once you obtain some upgrades or hyper bites and a special attack, the game opens up from a simple 3-hit combo to some full-on strategic fights. Enemies one at a time seem simple at first, but with waves attacking from different angles and with that meter going up, they will overwhelm even the best players quickly. It's a nice steady incline to keep gamers constantly on their toes and evolving their own skills. The boss battles or crown fights will fully test your understanding of the game's mechanics. All of the crowns I encountered early on send waves of enemies, making things incredibly hectic quickly. If you and your teammates aren't on top of things, they can get out of hand. Simply put, I enjoyed the game's combat, but it's not perfect. I'd love for the auto-lock camera to snap to the next enemy and for the parry mechanic to not leave you so vulnerable from other angles. But for an early access game, I think it's extremely entertaining. In its very first early access state, there are 3 main characters, and each of those have 2 archetypes. There are variants of ranged and tank builds with an option to upgrade each build's base stats. The hyper bites or abilities you gather are where the characters can really cater to your own playing style. You can enhance your dash's invincibility length, make your ranged fighter bounce bullets off a main target to get some extra damage off others, and restore depleted health when finishing a critical hit, and just so many more that enhance your different builds or playstyles. There are plenty of choices to make your character a major badass. Just make sure to check both options for pickups. I went the first 10 hours gaming without realizing you had 2 options by just hitting the down button when you're hovered over that pink glowing upgrade. But my dumbassery is your benefit. With the promise of more classes or player types, I can see the combat getting more and more interesting and unique to each gamer. But be patient, you have to earn your gear, abilities, and upgrades in this game to unleash the full potential. And we also have to remember there are a lot of open roster spots here. Things are going to get crazy as early access unfolds. Getting around in Hyperlight Breaker is a lot of fun. It has a gliding mechanic that screams Tears of the Kingdom, and breakers get to move around the map on hoverboards. These things were just a blast to use, and the stamina or energy meter for them is pretty generous. It may take a few tries to get the boards to work right on water, but if you feel stuck on any part of the map, you can always hover across that water to get to another area. Transitioning from hang gliding into hoverboard still needs some work, but I'm hoping Heart Machine can make that happen. Besides gliding and hoverboarding, your character can also dash both horizontally and vertically. Throw a double jump into the mix and you can get into all kinds of nooks and crannies your skill will allow. So you might ask, what is this game missing that might make some people wait for full access? Well, first off, I think the lack of the main bosses is a big reason for some people. Not being able to complete the full loop is unsatisfying at best and anticlimactic at the very least. So if you need that fulfilling sense of completion, wait for the Abyss King to be added. Second, with the game being co-op, all the options for matchmaking and in-game communication are basically non-existent. If you don't already have players added as friends on Steam or in Discord, you won't be able to communicate with them other than a positional marker. So if you need to talk to your teammates or ask questions, you might want to wait for those updates to hit as well. Lastly, and perhaps a little more broadly, the game needs more polish, and that's a big old duh seeing as how it's an early access game. But those jumping in thinking this will be on the same level as a fully released game will be disappointed. There are a lot of good times to be had, many places to explore, and a fresh new challenge for anyone up to it. But there are still some rough edges, a few glitches to iron out here and there, a lot more setting options and an onboarding process to add, and a big old laundry list of characters, abilities, and weapons need to be put into this to make it feel like a full game. So if you need everything spelled out and you hate working around some rough edges, then obviously just wait for full launch. But I gotta tell you, the overall combat is entertaining and intuitive, and it gives enough room for players to tweak builds to their own playstyle. The weapons, upgrades, and abilities also give you enough to try out a number of different approaches. And with at least a year of early access promised and monthly updates, I can see that growing constantly. The transversal is extremely enjoyable. It gives multiple moves, and with generous hoverboarding stamina, it doesn't make any cross-map adventures seem like a brutal slog. And with an increasingly challenged boss battle, it should keep players on their toes for a while. Heart Machine has proved that they can take and work with criticism and general feedback. Within 2 days, a number of gamer complaints were addressed in the first update. More graphical settings were made available, enemy drops were increased significantly, and key binding for keyboard and mouse players was made available. And that's why I absolutely recommend this game for those interested. When developers roll their sleeves up and address the real issues rather than reply with corporate speak, you know they are focused on giving the best gaming experience to their players rather than saving a profit. Heart Machine didn't clap back, they accepted the low review score on Steam and put out a great update addressing a lot of those issues. If you want a complete game experience, you can always wait, but the price might increase and you won't get a free copy of Hyper Light Drifter, which I think is an absolute gem. There is a lot to enjoy and I only see it getting better. Check out Hyper Light Breaker on Steam if you think it's up your alley. Thanks for watching. Feel free to leave a comment or hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider clicking the subscribe button now. We have more videos like this and have a weekly gamer news podcast called The Gamer Buff with all the latest gaming news. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, this is the Dove.